I was only 29 when my husband's will was read. His mistress grinned as she claimed the mansion, while I was left with a useless shack far outside of town. When I spoke up, my father-in-law snapped, "Be grateful, at least you got something." That night, I drove to the shack. But the moment I opened the door, my knees buckled. What waited inside changed everything. You won't believe the betrayal I faced, the kind that rips your entire life apart and leaves you with nothing but questions. I thought the most humiliating moment of my life was sitting in that stuffy law office, watching my husband's mistress inherit our beautiful mansion, while I, his grieving wife, was left with nothing but a worthless, rotting shack. But sometimes, the most worthless-looking inheritance holds the most dangerous secrets, and that abandoned shack was about to reveal why my life had been a meticulously planned lie, and why my husband's death might not have been an accident after all. I was 29, my name is Sophia, and just 3 weeks after Marcus died in a car crash, my world truly imploded. The polished mahogany walls of Harrison and Associates seemed to press in on me, reflecting a distorted version of everyone seated around the conference table. I sat there, in a squeaky leather chair, clutching Marcus's wedding band so tightly that its edges dug into my skin. All I could hear was the mistress, Melissa, whispering, "That fits her perfectly, cheap and pathetic." Her words were like acid, burning a hole through my already shattered heart. Everyone in that room, even my in-laws, Patricia and Richard, looked at me with either pity or smug satisfaction, utterly convinced that Marcus had shown me exactly what I was worth to him. Melissa, perched directly across from me, her manicured fingers drumming a steady, irritating rhythm on the gleaming table. She wore a black dress, but it was anything but morning attire. The neckline plunged just enough to be completely inappropriate. She kept touching a pearl necklace at her throat, a sickening performance. Every few seconds, she'd catch my eye and offer what I'm sure she thought was a sympathetic smile. It looked more like a cat eyeing a wounded bird. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Harrison's voice, old and liver-spotted, cut through the oppressive silence. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened the folder. My mother-in-law, Patricia, sat to my right, her posture as rigid and perfect as always. She hadn't glanced at me once. Richard, my father-in-law, held court at the head of the table, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the lawyer with an intensity that made me wonder what secrets he already knew. "The last will and testament of Marcus Jonathan Whitmore," Mr. Harrison began, his voice taking on that formal, learned cadence. "Written and notarized 6 months prior to his death." 6 months. My stomach twisted into knots. 6 months ago, we'd been planning our 5th anniversary trip to Greece. He'd shown me pictures of Santorini, promised we'd watch the sunset from a cliffside villa. 6 months ago, I truly thought we were happy. To my beloved Melissa Crawford, the lawyer continued, and the blood drained from my face. Beloved, the word hung in the air like a brutal slap. I leave the estate at 47, Rosewood Drive, including all furnishings and contents therein. The mansion. Our home. No. What I thought was our home. The place where I'd spent 2 years meticulously selecting every piece of furniture, every painting, every throw pillow, trying to build us a life worth living. Melissa's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Those eyes glittered with undeniable triumph. Additionally, to Miss Crawford, I leave the investment portfolio held with Goldman Sachs, currently valued at approximately $2.2 million. The Mercedes-Benz S-Class, the BMW X5, and the vacation property in Aspen. Each item felt like another twist of the knife. Aspen, where we'd spent last Christmas, making love by the fireplace as snow fell outside. The Mercedes he'd given me for my birthday, now apparently taken back in his will. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to demand someone explain how this was possible. But I sat frozen, that wedding band cutting deeper and deeper into my palm. "This is insane," I heard myself say, my voice sounding strange and distant. "We were married. California is a community property state. He can't just," Richard's voice cut through my protest like a blade. "Everything was in his name, Sophia. The properties, the investments, all purchased before your marriage or with his inheritance from his grandmother. Separate property." His tone was infuriatingly matter-of-fact, almost bored, as if we were discussing the weather rather than my complete disinheritance. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, a nervous gesture of someone about to deliver more bad news. "There is more, Mrs. Whitmore." He glanced at me with what might have been pity. "To my wife, Sophia Marie Whitmore, I leave the property at 1847 Old Mill Road, commonly known as the Fisher Shack." The Fisher Shack? Oh, I knew the place. Everyone in town did. It was a local eyesore, a ramshackle building on the outskirts, abandoned for at least a decade. Parents told their kids ghost stories about it. Teenagers dared each other to spend the night there. And my husband had left it to me. "That fits her perfectly," Melissa stage whispered to a friend I hadn't even noticed sitting beside her. "Cheap and pathetic." The laughter that followed felt like acid on my skin. Even Patricia's mouth twitched slightly, though she had the decency to suppress her smile. But it was Richard's expression that hurt the most, a mixture of satisfaction and something else, maybe relief, as if a problem had been neatly solved. "This has to be a mistake," I said, standing so abruptly that my chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Marcus promised me. We had plans." My voice broke on the last word, and I hated myself for showing weakness in front of them. "Sit down, Sophia." Richard's voice held a clear warning. "You're making a scene." "Making a scene?" I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. "Your son just left everything to his mistress, and I'm making a scene?" "Be grateful," he said, his steel eyes narrowing. "At least you got something. Marcus could have left you nothing at all." The implication hung heavy between us. I should be grateful for a worthless, rotting shack. Grateful that my husband had remembered me at all in between dividing up our life and handing it to the woman he'd been sleeping with behind my back. The woman who now wore a pearl necklace I recognized, the one that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother, the one he'd said was being cleaned. Mr. Harrison slid a key across the table to me. It was old, rusty, attached to a leather tag with the address scrolled in fading ink. "The property transfers to you immediately, Mrs. Whitmore. All taxes have been paid through the end of the year." 3 months. They'd given me 3 months to figure out what to do with a worthless piece of property. While Melissa moved into my home, drove my car, spent my husband's money. I grabbed the key, its cold, rough metal biting into my skin. "I'll contest this," I said, looking directly at Mr. Harrison. "This isn't right." The lawyer's expression remained professionally neutral. "That is your right, Mrs. Whitmore. However, I should inform you that the will was properly executed and witnessed. Mr. Whitmore was of sound mind and body when he signed it. The grounds for contest would be limited. Have fun in your shack." Melissa called out as I headed for the door, her voice dripping with fall sweetness. "I hear it's lovely this time of year." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I had, I might have done something that would have landed me in jail. Instead, I walked out of that office with my head high. Even as tears blurred my vision, I made it to my car, my old Honda Civic that Marcus had always complained about, before the sobs finally came. The sun was setting by the time I could drive again, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to mock my grief. I should have gone home to my sister's house, where I'd been staying since the accident. Elena would have made tea, would have listened to me rage and cry, would have helped me make sense of this nightmare. But something pulled me toward Old Mill Road instead. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the need to see just how thoroughly Marcus had humiliated me. Or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't quite name. A whisper in the back of my mind that sounded almost like Marcus's voice. "There are places I'll never let you go, sophomore. Not safe for you." He'd said that once, early in our marriage, when I'd wanted to go exploring in the old industrial district. I thought he was being overprotective. Now I wondered if he'd been hiding something even then. The drive to Old Mill Road took me through parts of town I rarely visited. Past the renovated downtown with its boutique shops and farm-to-table restaurants. Past the suburban sprawl of identical houses. Then, into the forgotten edges where the town bled into wilderness. The road narrowed. Streetlights became sporadic, then disappeared altogether. My headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty road and encroaching forest. The GPS on my phone lost signal twice before I finally saw it. 1847 Old Mill Road. The shack squatted in a clearing like something out of a horror movie. Even in the dark, I could see the roof sagging in the middle, threatening to collapse. Boards covered most of the windows, though a few had fallen away, leaving black holes that seemed to stare out at the night. Vines had claimed one entire side of the structure, their tendrils working through gaps in the siding like fingers prying apart the bones of the house. I sat in my car for a long moment, engine running, debating whether to turn around. This was insane. It was past 9 o'clock. I was alone, and this place looked like it might collapse if I breathed on it wrong. But the key seemed to burn in my pocket, and that whisper in my mind grew louder. What was Marcus hiding? The key stuck in the lock, and for a moment I thought it might snap off. Then, with a grinding sound that made my teeth ache, the mechanism turned. The door swung inward on hinges that screamed in protest, the sound sharp enough to send a few bats fluttering from the eaves above my head. I jumped back, my heart hammering, then laughed at myself, a bitter, hollow sound that the darkness swallowed whole. My phone's flashlight cut through the gloom as I stepped over the threshold. The air hit me immediately, thick with dust and rot. But underneath it, something else. Something metallic and sharp, like old pennies or blood. No, that was ridiculous. I was letting the atmosphere get to me. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each step producing a symphony of creaks and protests. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight like tiny ghosts disturbed from their rest. The main room was larger than I'd expected, though the shadows seemed to press in from all sides, making it feel claustrophobic. Furniture huddled under sheets that had gone gray with age and dirt. Boxes were stacked against one wall, their cardboard soft with moisture damage. But it was the walls that made me stop and stare. They were covered in markings, not graffiti, but deliberate carvings cut deep into the wood. Initials, dates, symbols I didn't recognize. My flashlight tracked across them. JM 1987. The deal is done. 1993. They know run 2001. Somewhere, in what looked like code, numbers and letters that meant nothing to me. In one corner, someone had drawn what appeared to be a family tree, though half the names had been scratched out so violently that the wood splintered. I found myself looking for Marcus's name, for any Whitmore at all, but the writing was too faded, too damaged to make out clearly. The fireplace dominated one wall, its mouth stuffed with papers that looked like they'd been shoved in hastily. I pulled one free, but it disintegrated in my hands, leaving only fragments of text. Transfer complete. Liability assumed. In the event of discovery. A sound from beneath the floor made me freeze. A knock, deliberate and measured. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. My rational mind said it was the old house settling, or maybe animals that had made a home in the crawl space. But it sounded so intentional, so human, that goosebumps rose on my arms. Hello. My voice came out as barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again louder. Is someone there? Silence. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined it, the knocking came again, this time from a different spot, as if something was moving beneath the floorboards, tracking my location. My flashlight beam wavered as my hands shook. This was stupid. I was alone in an abandoned building at night, jumping at every sound like some horror movie victim. I should leave, come back in daylight with Elena and maybe her boyfriend Tom, who worked construction and could tell me if the place was even safe to enter. But as I turned to go, my light caught something that made me stop. A photograph tucked into the frame of a broken mirror. Unlike everything else in this place, it looked relatively new. I pulled it free, angling my phone to see better. It was Marcus, but younger, maybe 10 years ago, before I'd met him. He stood in front of this very shack with 3 other men, all of them in expensive suits that seemed wildly out of place against the ramshackle backdrop. They were smiling, holding champagne glasses as if celebrating something. One of the men looked familiar, though I couldn't place him. The photo was dated on the back, Phase 1 complete. 2014, a year before Marcus and I met at that charity fundraiser. He'd said he was there supporting the hospital's new wing. I'd been there as a volunteer, fresh out of college, trying to network and find my place in the world. He'd been charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. Had it all been planned? Another knock from below, this time so forceful that dust rained down from the ceiling. I stumbled backward, my hip hitting a covered table. The sheet slipped off, revealing more photographs, dozens of them, scattered across the surface. My light passed over them, and my blood turned to ice. They were all of me. Me at my college graduation. Me at my first job interview. Me, jogging in the park near my old apartment. Me having coffee with friends. Shopping for groceries. Leaving the gym. Some were dated years before I'd met Marcus. In one, I couldn't have been more than 17, wearing my high school uniform, completely unaware that someone was watching, documenting, studying me. My legs gave out and I sank onto the dusty couch, not caring about the cloud of debris that rose around me. The wedding band, Marcus's wedding band that I'd been carrying like some sort of talisman, fell from my numb fingers and rolled across the floor, disappearing into the shadows. How long had they been watching me? Who were they and why? I wasn't special. I wasn't rich or connected or important. I was just Sophia, middle-class, nobody Sophia who thought she'd won the lottery when Marcus Whitmore had shown interest in her. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a different sound, scratching, like nails or claws against wood. It seemed to be moving, circling the room beneath the floor. I pulled my feet up onto the couch, suddenly terrified that something might grab my ankles, pull me down into whatever darkness existed below this place. My phone buzzed, making me jump. Elena texting to ask if I was okay, if I was coming home. Home? The word seemed foreign now. Did I even have a home? The mansion belonged to Melissa. This shack was a prison of secrets, and Elena's guest room was just temporary charity. I started to text her back, to tell her I was fine, I'd be there soon, when all the lights on my phone went out. Not just the flashlight, the screen went black, the device completely dead despite having been at 60% battery when I'd arrived. The darkness was absolute. No moon penetrated the boarded windows. No streetlights existed this far from civilization. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And in that darkness, I heard it clearly. A door opening somewhere in the house. Not the front door I'd entered through, but another one deeper in the structure. Footsteps, slow and measured, moving through the house. They stopped occasionally, as if the walker was examining something, then continued. They were getting closer. I held my breath, pressing myself deeper into the couch, praying that whoever, whatever it was, passed by without noticing me. The footsteps entered the room, paused. I could hear breathing that wasn't my own. Slow and steady. The smell of cigarette smoke drifted through the air. Then, as suddenly as it had died, my phone blazed back to life, the flashlight app automatically resuming. The room was empty, but on the dusty floor, fresh footprints led from the doorway to just a few feet from where I sat, then simply stopped as if whoever had made them had vanished into thin air. On the table where the photographs had been, a new item had appeared, a leather-bound notebook I was certain hadn't been there before. Written on its cover in faded gold lettering was a single word, Sophia. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Every instinct screamed that I should run, leave this place, and never return. But I had to know. I had to understand what Marcus had been involved in, why I'd been watched, what this place really was. The notebook's pages were filled with entries in Marcus's handwriting, dated starting from 3 years before we'd met. The first entry made my stomach clench. Subject acquired. Surveillance begins tomorrow. R insists she's perfect for the role. No family money, limited connections, ambitious enough to be grateful for attention. If she's as malleable as the background check suggests, phase 2 can begin within 18 months. I was going to be sick. Our entire relationship, our marriage, had been some kind of operation. But for what purpose? I flipped through more pages, finding surveillance logs, notes about my habits, my preferences, my weaknesses. There were strategies for approaching me, for making me fall in love, for keeping me isolated from anyone who might interfere. A door slammed somewhere in the house, the sharp crack of wood against wood that couldn't be explained by wind or settling. Then another. And another. Every door in the house seemed to be slamming in sequence, the sound growing louder, more violent, closer. I ran. I crashed through the front door, stumbling over the rotted porch steps, my phone's light swinging wildly as I sprinted for my car. Behind me, the house had gone silent again, but I could feel it watching, waiting. I fumbled with my keys, finally managing to start the engine and throw the car into reverse. As my headlights swung across the shack one last time, I saw a figure in one of the broken windows, tall, unmoving, just a silhouette against the deeper darkness within. Then my car hit the road, and I was speeding away, that leather notebook clutched against my chest, my mind racing with questions that seemed to multiply with every heartbeat. Marcus's voice echoed in my memory, something he'd said just a week before his death, when he'd had too much wine at dinner. If anything happens to me, Soph, stay away from the shack. Promise me. I'd laughed it off, asked what shack he was talking about. He'd changed the subject, but his eyes had held something I'd never seen before. Fear. Now, parked outside Elena's house with the doors locked and the engine still running, I understood that fear. Whatever was in that shack, whatever secrets it held, they were dangerous enough that Marcus had tried to protect me from them, even while using me as a pawn in some larger game. But protection or not, planned or not, I was going back because somewhere in that rotting structure was the truth about my marriage, my life, and possibly my future. The notebook in my lap proved that much. Someone wanted me to know. Wanted me to find these secrets. Tomorrow, in daylight, with backup and a fully charged phone, I would return to 1847, Old Mill Road. I would tear that place apart if I had to, because I was done being anyone's pawn, done being the naive girl in those surveillance photos. If Marcus and his family had orchestrated my life for their purposes, then I would use their own weapon against them. The shack they'd left me as an insult would become the key to my revenge. I just had to survive long enough to use it. The morning sun did nothing to make the shack less ominous. If anything, daylight revealed damage the darkness had hidden, sections of roof that had completely caved in, walls that leaned at angles that defied physics, and a foundation that had shifted enough to create gaps you could put your fists through. Elena stood beside me, her mouth hanging open as she took it all in. Sophia, this place should be condemned, she said, pulling her jacket tighter despite the warm September morning. You can't seriously be thinking about going back in there. Tom, her boyfriend, was already circling the structure with his contractor's eye, occasionally poking at support beams and shaking his head. She's right, sophomore. This place is a lawsuit waiting to happen. One good storm, and the whole thing comes down. But I wasn't listening to their concerns about structural integrity. My eyes were fixed on the window where I'd seen that figure last night. In daylight, it was just another empty frame. Nothing sinister about it except the darkness beyond. Yet, I knew what I'd seen. Someone had been in there with me. I need to get something, I said, already moving toward the door. There's important paperwork inside. Financial documents. It wasn't entirely a lie. The notebook I'd found was definitely important, though not in the way they'd assume. I'd spent the rest of the night reading it, each entry more disturbing than the last. Marcus had documented everything, every conversation we'd had in those early days, every manipulation, every lie. But there were references to other documents, other records that painted a bigger picture. And they were somewhere in this shack. Then we all go, Elena said firmly. And if the floor starts to give way, we leave immediately. Tom grabbed a crowbar and flashlight from his truck. Stay behind me. Step where I step. The house felt different in daylight, less actively malevolent, more sadly decrepit. Dust motes floated lazily through shafts of sunlight that penetrated the gaps in the walls. The photographs from last night were gone, the table bare, except for a layer of dust that looked undisturbed. Even the footprints I'd seen had vanished, as if I'd imagined the whole thing. What exactly are we looking for? Tom asked, testing each floorboard before putting his weight on it. Anything that looks important, I said vaguely, running my hands along the walls, searching for hidden compartments. Marcus's notebook had mentioned a safe room, a place where the real records were kept. Maybe a safe or a filing cabinet. It was Elena who found it, or rather, she found the absence of it. This room is too small, she announced, standing in what had probably been a bedroom. Look at the exterior wall from outside versus where this interior wall is. There's at least 3 feet missing. Tom immediately went to work with his crowbar, prying at the boards until one came loose with a crack that made us all jump. Behind it was exactly what Elena had predicted, a hidden space, narrow but deep, with a ladder leading down into darkness. That's not up to code, Tom muttered. But he was already testing the ladder's stability. Seems solid enough, though, newer than the rest of this place. The hidden cellar was a different world from the decay above. The walls were reinforced concrete, the floor smooth cement. Industrial shelving lined the walls, loaded with bankers' boxes, each one labeled with dates and code names. A workbench occupied one corner, covered in what looked like surveillance equipment, old cameras, recording devices, even what appeared to be phone tapping equipment. What the hell was your husband into? Elena whispered, picking up a device that looked like something out of a spy movie. I didn't answer because I'd found something that made my blood run cold. A box labeled Acquisition. Sophia Marichin, my maiden name, 2008 to 2015. Inside were detailed reports, photographs, even copies of my college transcripts and medical records. There was a psychological profile that dissected my personality with clinical precision. Subject shows signs of father abandonment issues following parents' divorce. Likely to respond positively to older male authority figures who provide stability and protection. Recommend Marcus adopt paternal protective role initially, transitioning to romantic interest once trust established. My hands shook as I read about myself like I was some lab rat, every vulnerability cataloged and weaponized. There were notes about my ex-boyfriend from college, how that relationship's failure had left me primed for rescue fantasy. There were observations about my career ambitions, how my desire to prove myself made me susceptible to lifestyle elevation through marriage. Sophia, Tom's voice was tight. He was standing by another section of shelving, holding an open box. You need to see this. The box contained rolls of cash, but not just any cash. Old bills, some dating back to the 1980s, all in sequential serial numbers. The kind of money that raised questions, that left trails. There had to be hundreds of thousands of dollars here. Maybe more. This is evidence of something, Elena said, her phone out, taking pictures. Money laundering. Maybe we should call the police. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. Both of them looked at me strangely. Not yet. I need to understand what this is first. What Marcus was involved in. I'd moved to another box. This one more recent. Inside were contracts, all in legalese I couldn't fully understand, but names kept appearing, Richard Whitmore. Several I didn't recognize. And at the bottom of each document, witness signatures that included Marcus and someone named J. Fisher. Fisher. Like the Fisher Shack. A photograph slipped from between the contracts. It was older, from the 1970s based on the cars in the background. A group of men stood in front of this very shack, all wearing suits and satisfied smiles. I recognized a younger Richard Whitmore immediately. Those cold eyes were unmistakable. But it was the man next to him that made me gasp. I'd seen him before, in newspaper archives at the library when I was researching the history of the town for a college project. Joseph Fisher, real estate developer, who disappeared in 1987 under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a fortune that was never found. Oh my God, I breathed, pieces clicking together in my mind. They killed him. They killed Fisher and took his money, used this place to hide it. Sophia, that's a huge accusation, Elena started. But I was already pulling out more documents, spreading them across the workbench. Look at the dates. Fisher disappears in August 1987. These contracts start transferring his properties to shell companies in September 1987. All witnessed by Richard Whitmore and Associates. I grabbed another photograph, this one showing the same group of men at what looked like a celebration dinner. This is dated 2 weeks after Fisher vanished. They're toasting with champagne. Tom had gone very quiet, his face pale as he examined the money. This serial number range. I remember my dad talking about this. These bills were part of a federal investigation in the early 90s. Something about a massive real estate fraud scheme that was never fully solved. A sound from above made us all freeze. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crossing the floor of the shack. Ceiling dust rained down with each step. We hadn't heard a car approach. Hadn't heard the door open, but someone was definitely up there. "We need to leave," Elena whispered. But I was already gathering documents, shoving them into my bag. The footsteps stopped directly above the hidden entrance to the cellar. Then Richard Whitmore's voice drifted down, conversational and calm. "I know you're down there, Sophia. We need to talk." My blood turned to ice. How did he know about this place? How did he know I was here? "Don't come up," Elena hissed, grabbing my arm. "We call 911 right now." But Richard continued as if he'd heard her. "The police won't help you, dear. Half of them are on our payroll. Have been since Fisher's time. Come up and we can discuss this like civilized people." Tom had his phone out, but he was frowning at the screen. No signal. We had signal upstairs. "Cell jammer," Richard's voice explained pleasantly. "Simple precaution. Now, you can come up or I can come down. But this ladder is the only way out, and I'd rather not have this conversation in that musty cellar." I looked at Elena and Tom, saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. But there was something else in Elena's expression, determination. She picked up one of the old cameras from the workbench, hefted it like a weapon. Tom grabbed a crowbar. "We go up together," I said quietly. "He won't do anything with witnesses." But I was wrong about that. We climbed up to find Richard wasn't alone. 3 men stood with him, all wearing suits despite the shabby surroundings, all with the kind of build that suggested they didn't spend their days behind desks. Richard himself looked perfectly at ease, examining the carvings on the walls with what appeared to be nostalgia. "You know," he said without turning around, "Marcus was supposed to keep you away from here. That was the entire point of the marriage, keep you close but controlled. Make sure you never went digging into your connection to all this." "What connection?" I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. I'd never even heard of this place before the while reading. Richard finally turned to face me, and his smile was almost pitying. "Your maiden name is Chin, but your mother's maiden name was Fisher. Joseph Fisher was your great-uncle, though your mother never knew it. He'd had a falling out with the family years before, changed his name, built his fortune from scratch. But blood is blood, and when we discovered you existed, well, we couldn't risk you making a claim on his estate." The room spun. I grabbed the wall for support, my mind racing to process this information. "So, you had Marcus marry me too, what? Make sure I never found out." "Initially, yes. But Marcus grew fond of you. Started having second thoughts about the arrangement. He was going to tell you everything." Richard's expression hardened. "That's why he had to go. You killed your own son." Elena's voice was horrified. Richard didn't deny it. "The syndicate comes first. Always has. Marcus knew that when he was brought in. He forgot it when he fell in love with you. He said the last word like it was distasteful. Sentiment has no place in business." "This isn't business. It's murder," Tom said, stepping forward. But one of the suited men blocked his path. "Prove it," Richard said simply. "My son died in a tragic accident. The police investigated thoroughly. Case closed." I thought about the notebook hidden in my bag, the documents I'd photographed, the evidence in the cellar below. "If you were going to kill me, you would have done it already." Richard laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Kill you? My dear, you're worth more alive. You're the last legitimate Fisher heir. With you under our control, any future claims on the old properties, any investigations into the past, they all stop with you." Marcus understood that. He was supposed to get you pregnant, ensure the bloodline continued under our supervision. But he got sentimental, started talking about running away with you, starting fresh somewhere else. "I'll never help you," I said. "You already are," Richard replied. "Just by accepting the shack, you've legally acknowledged the will. By entering this property, you've established possession. And now that you've found our little storage facility, well, you're complicit. Those documents down there, your fingerprints are all over them now. That money, you've handled it. If this ever comes to light, you'll go down with us." It was a trap. The whole thing had been a trap, and I'd walked right into it. "You're insane if you think I'll keep quiet about this," I said. But Richard was already moving toward the door. "You'll keep quiet because you have no choice. Go to the police with your wild theories. See how far you get. Detective Morrison plays poker with me every Thursday. Judge Hamilton's daughter got into Harvard thanks to a generous donation from our education fund. The district attorney, he owns 3 properties that used to belong to your great-uncle." He paused at the doorway, his men following. "Clean up this mess, Sophia. Get rid of those documents. Forget what you think you know. And we'll leave you alone. You can keep the shack. Fix it up. Sell it. Burn it down for all I care. But if you try to use what you found here against us, remember, you're not just fighting me. You're fighting 40 years of established power." They left us standing there in stunned silence. It wasn't until we heard car engines start and fade into the distance that any of us moved. "We're going to the FBI," Elena said immediately. "This is beyond local corruption. This is organized crime." But I was staring at something Richard's men had left behind, a cigarette but still smoldering on the dusty table. The same brand I'd smelled last night. They'd been here then, too, watching me discover their secrets, letting me find just enough to implicate myself. He's right about one thing, I said slowly. My fingerprints are all over that evidence now. If they spin it right, I could look like I was involved all along. The neglected wife who knew about her husband's criminal connections and tried to profit from his death. That's ridiculous, Tom protested. But he was already seeing the angles, how a good lawyer could twist the narrative. I walked to the window, looking out at the tire tracks in the mud. Multiple vehicles, not just Richard's. How many people were involved in this? How deep did it go? We need to be smarter, I said. We can't just run to law enforcement without knowing who we can trust. First, we document everything. Every piece of paper, every serial number on those bills, every photograph. We build a case so airtight that even corrupted officials can't ignore it. Elena was already taking more photos with her phone, but she looked troubled. Sophia, what if they come back? What if they decide you're too much of a liability? I thought about Marcus, about the accident that had killed him. His car had gone off the road on a clear night. No skid marks, no sign he tried to brake. The police had ruled it driver error, possibly falling asleep at the wheel. But Marcus had been coming from his parents' house that night, and he'd called me just an hour before, sounding agitated, saying he needed to tell me something important. Then we make sure I'm not an easy target, I said. We make copies of everything, store them in different places. We create a dead man switch. If something happens to me, everything goes public. Tom had been examining the cellar entrance, and suddenly he straightened. There's another level. We all turned to look at him. He was pointing at the ladder, which continued down past the floor of the first cellar. See, there's a hatch on the floor, painted to blend in, but the ladder keeps going. My heart raced as we opened the hatch, revealing a second chamber below. This one was smaller, older, and contained a single item, a metal filing cabinet that looked like it had been there since the shack was built. Inside were the real secrets. Not just financial documents, but photographs of crime scenes, what looked like murder confessions, and a leather-bound ledger that detailed every crime the syndicate had committed since 1987. Names, dates, methods, and most importantly, who had ordered each action. Marcus's death was in there, listed as Termination Order Number 47. Subject, Marcus Whitmore. Reason, security breach/potential whistleblower. Authorized by R. Whitmore. Method, vehicular incident. Status, complete. Richard had signed his own son's death warrant. But it was the next entry that made my blood run cold. Termination Order Number 48. Subject, Sophia Whitmore. Reason, inherited liability. Authorized by R. Whitmore. Method, TBD. Status, pending review. We need to leave, Elena said, her voice high with panic. Right now. We grabbed everything we could carry, the ledger, key documents, photographs. As we climbed back up, I noticed something I'd missed before. Fresh scratches around the doorframe, as if someone had recently installed something. Tom saw it, too, his face going pale. Cameras, he whispered. They're watching us right now. We ran for Tom's truck, throwing everything inside. As we peeled out of the driveway, I saw them in the rearview mirror, two black SUVs emerging from the tree lean, following us. Where do we go? Elena asked, clutching the ledger to her chest. I thought fast. The newspaper. The Coastal Tribune. Jenny Martinez is an investigative reporter there. She's been trying to expose corruption in the city for years. If we can get to her, get this published before they stop us. Tom took a hard right, tires squealing. They're gaining on us. The next few minutes were a blur of sharp turns and near misses. Tom drove like a man possessed, using his knowledge of the back roads to stay ahead of our pursuers. We burst onto Main Street, Saturday shoppers jumping back as we careened past. The Tribune building was just ahead. I could see Jenny's car in the parking lot. We screeched to a stop, and I was running before Tom had even thrown it in park, the ledger clutched against my chest. I burst through the doors, past the startled receptionist, up the stairs to the newsroom. Jenny was at her desk, and her eyes widened as she saw me. Sophia, what? Richard Whitmore killed his son. I gasped, shoving the ledger at her. And Joseph Fisher. And others. It's all in here. The whole syndicate, 40 years of crimes. They're coming for me right now. Jenny, to her credit, didn't hesitate. She grabbed the ledger, her scanner already warming up. Get everything digital now. Elena and Tom burst in behind me, arms full of documents. Other reporters were standing now, sensing a story. Jenny started barking orders, and suddenly the entire newsroom was in motion, scanning, photographing, uploading. They can't stop all of us, Jenny said, her fingers flying over her keyboard. Not once it's out there. Through the window, I could see the black SUVs pulling into the parking lot. Richard stepped out of one, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up at the newsroom window, and our eyes met. His expression was unreadable, but I saw him say something to his men. They stayed by the cars. My phone rang. An unknown number. Don't answer. Elena started. But I already had. You've made a serious mistake. Richard's voice was calm. Too calm. You have no idea what you're destroying. You destroyed it yourself when you killed Marcus, I said, putting him on speaker so Jenny could record. When you killed Joseph Fisher. Fisher was a pedophile, Richard said bluntly. Did you see that in your precious documents? He had a thing for teenage boys. 3 families came to us begging for justice the law wouldn't provide. Yes, we killed him, and we took his money and used it to build something better. Schools, hospitals, homeless shelters, all funded with Fisher's blood money. I faltered. This wasn't in the documents. But Jenny was shaking her head, mouthing lie at me. Even if that were true, it doesn't justify 40 years of murder and corruption, I said. Doesn't it? We cleaned up this town, Sophia. When we took over, it was dying drugs, violence, poverty. Now look at it. Thriving, safe. All because we were willing to do what needed to be done. You killed your own son. A pause, then quieter. Marcus made his choice. He chose you over his family, over his obligations. I gave him every chance to come back, to remember who he was. He refused. So you had him murdered. I had a problem solved. Just like I'll solve this one. The line went dead. Through the window, I watched the SUVs pull away. They were leaving. Why were they leaving? Jenny's computer pinged. Then another reporter's. Then another. What's happening? I asked. Jenny's face had gone white. Every file we just uploaded, they're being deleted from our servers, from the cloud, from everywhere. How is that possible? Tom was at his own laptop. It's not just here. Every copy I emailed to myself, to my contacts, they're all gone. It's like they never existed. I looked down at the physical ledger in my hands. It was all we had left. The original documents were back at the shack, probably already being destroyed. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. You have 1 hour to return what you've stolen. After that, termination order number 48 goes into effect. Your friends, too. Their families. Everyone you've involved in this. 1 hour. Elena grabbed my hand. We run. Right now. We take the ledger and we run. But I was thinking about Marcus, about the fear in his eyes that last night. He'd known this was coming. He'd tried to protect me the only way he knew how, by leaving me the shack. Knowing I'd find the truth. Knowing I'd have leverage. No, I said quietly. We don't run. We fight, but we fight smart. I turned to Jenny. How fast can you get a camera crew here? She blinked. 20 minutes. Do it. Live broadcast. We go public with everything right now. Before they can stop us. I held up the ledger. They can delete digital files, but they can't delete a live broadcast that thousands of people are watching. Jenny was already making calls. Other reporters were setting up cameras, transforming the newsroom into an impromptu studio. I looked back at the window. The black SUVs had returned, but now there were more of them. A lot more. They were surrounding the building. Sophia, Tom said quietly. What if they don't care about witnesses? What if they're past that point? I thought about Richard's voice on the phone. The resignation in it when he talked about Marcus. They were past the point of caring about collateral damage. This was endgame for them and for us. Then we make sure the truth outlives us, I said, opening the ledger to the page with Marcus's termination order. We make sure his death meant something. The camera's red light blinked on. Jenny held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. Good evening, she began, her voice steady despite everything. We're interrupting our regular programming with explosive revelations about a criminal syndicate that has controlled our city for 40 years. Through the window, I saw Richard on his phone again, his face twisted with rage. But he wasn't looking at the building anymore. He was looking up the street, where police cars were arriving. Not local police, but state police. FBI. Someone else had been watching. Someone else had been waiting for this moment. As Jenny continued her broadcast, as the ledger's secrets spilled out into the light, I felt something shift in the air. The shack had one more secret, I realized. One more card to play. Because there had been another watcher all along, someone in the shadows documenting everything, just like the syndicate had documented me. The cigarette butts, the mysteriously appearing notebook with my name on it, the convenient discovery of the cellar. Someone had been guiding me to this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Well played, Mrs. Whitmore. Your husband would be proud. The rest of the evidence is en route to federal authorities. Signed, JF. JF, Joseph Fisher. But Joseph Fisher had been dead for 40 years, hadn't he? The federal agents had cordoned off the Tribune building, but they couldn't stop what had already begun. Jenny's broadcast had gone viral within minutes, picked up by national networks before Richard's people could suppress it. Now, 3 days later, I sat in the town library's basement archives, surrounded by boxes of old newspapers and microfiche that the syndicate apparently hadn't thought to destroy. Elena sat across from me, cross-referencing the real estate syndicate and every name mentioned in that ledger. The FBI had the original now, but I'd memorized enough to know what to look for. Found something, Elena said, turning her screen toward me. Joseph Fisher had a son. Death certificate filed in 1986, 1 year before Joseph supposedly died. But look at this. She pulled up another document. School enrollment records show A.J. Fisher Jr. attending private school in Switzerland from 1986 to 1990. After his supposed death, my pulse quickened. He faked his son's death to protect him. Or someone else did. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. The death certificate was signed by Dr. Marcus Whitmore Sr., Richard's older brother. He died in a boating accident 2 months after signing it. Another accident, another convenient death. The pattern was so clear now that I wondered how no one had seen it before. Or maybe they had, and they'd ended up like Dr. Whitmore. The library's fluorescent lights flickered, and I found myself glancing at the exits. Even with federal protection, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The syndicate had operated for 40 years. They wouldn't go down without a fight. My phone buzzed. Another text from JF. Municipal Records, Box 1847. Third folder. Time you knew the whole truth. 1847, the same number as the shack's address. I found the box quickly, my hands trembling as I opened the third folder. Inside were property deeds, but not just any properties. These were for buildings all over town, all purchased between 1970 and 1987. All in my mother's maiden name. Fisher. Oh my God, I breathed. My mother owned half the town and never knew it. The deeds were tucked behind falsified documents showing the properties transferred to the syndicate's shell companies, but the originals were here. Hidden in plain sight in public records that no one had bothered to check, because everyone assumed Joseph Fisher had no heirs. Elena was reading over my shoulder. Sophia, if these are legitimate, you don't just own that shack. You own them all. The business district, 3 hotels, billions in real estate. Which explains why they needed me under control, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. It wasn't just about keeping me quiet. They needed me alive, but ignorant, in case anyone ever challenged their ownership. They could always produce me as the heir who had willingly transferred the properties. A shadow fell across the table. I looked up to find a man standing there, elderly but straight-backed, with eyes that seemed familiar, even though I'd never seen him before. He wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the shoulder holster beneath. Mrs. Whitmore, he said quietly. We need to talk. Elena started to stand, reaching for her phone. But the man held up a hand. I'm not with them. I've been fighting them for 40 years. My name is James Fisher. Joseph was my father, the son who'd supposedly died. I stared at him, seeing it now. The same jawline as in Joseph's old photos. The same intense gaze. You sent the texts, I said. He nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting down carefully, as if his bones hurt. I've been watching, waiting for the right moment. When Marcus married you, I thought it was over. They'd won. But then Marcus started having doubts. He reached out to me, wanted to know the truth about his family's empire. You were in contact with Marcus for the last 6 months of his life? He was gathering evidence, planning to bring them all down. The ledger you found? Marcus compiled most of it. He was going to give it to you on your anniversary. Tell you everything. James's face darkened. Richard found out 3 days before. You know the rest. I thought about Marcus's strange behavior in those final weeks. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls. The way he'd held me like he was saying goodbye. He'd known what was coming. Why didn't you help him? Elena demanded. Why let him die? I tried. I warned him to run, to take you and disappear. But Marcus believed he could outsmart his father. He thought Richard would never actually. James stopped, swallowing hard. He underestimated how far Richard would go to protect the syndicate. And now? I asked. What's your plan? James pulled out a thick envelope from his jacket. 40 years of evidence. Everything my father gathered before they killed him. Everything I've collected since. And everything Marcus added. Bank records, murder confessions, recorded conversations. The FBI has copies, but I wanted you to have the originals. Why? Because this is your fight now. Your inheritance. Not just the properties, but the responsibility to see justice done. He stood, wincing slightly. They'll come for me now that I've shown myself. But it doesn't matter anymore. The truth is out. Wait, I said as he turned to leave. Your father, the things Richard said about him lies, James said flatly. My father was investigating child trafficking in the foster system. He got too close to the truth, found out some powerful people were involved. So, they killed him and destroyed his reputation to make sure no one would listen if any evidence surfaced. He walked away before I could ask more questions, disappearing into the stacks of books. When I tried to follow, he was gone. No sign he'd ever been there except for the envelope in my hands. Inside were photographs I'd never seen. Marcus and James together, planning, preparing. There were recordings on USB drives, financial records that showed the money trail leading all the way to judges, senators, even a governor. The syndicate wasn't just a local operation. It was a cancer that had metastasized throughout the state. "We need to get this to the FBI immediately," Elena said. But I was looking at something else. A note in Marcus's handwriting dated the day before he died. "Sophia, if you're reading this, then I failed to protect you, and I'm sorry. The shack isn't your prison. It's your weapon. Everything they've built sits on stolen land, your land. The original deeds are hidden in the library. Box 1847. The development contracts are all fraudulent. One lawsuit and their entire empire crumbles. But be careful. They'll kill to protect it. Trust Jenny Martinez. Trust Agent Sarah Coleman at the FBI. And trust yourself. You're stronger than you know. All my love." Tears blurred my vision. He tried to save me, even knowing it would cost him everything. My phone rang. Jenny Martinez. "Sophia, you need to see the news now." We ran upstairs to the library's main floor where a crowd had gathered around the television. The breaking news banner read, "Richard Whitmore arrested in federal corruption probe." There he was, being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of cold fury. But it was the next arrest that shocked me. Patricia Whitmore, Marcus's mother, also in cuffs. Her perfect composure finally cracked. "The FBI raided their homes an hour ago," Jenny said, appearing beside me. "Found enough evidence to put them away for life. But Sophia, there's something else." She handed me her phone. The screen showed a news article from that morning. Local businessman found dead in apparent suicide. The businessman was James Fisher. The man I'd just spoken to an hour ago had been dead since dawn. "That's impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "He was just here. He gave me this." I held up the envelope. Jenny's expression was grim. "Security footage shows you and Elena alone at that table for the past 2 hours. No one else came near you." The envelope in my hands was real. I could feel its weight. See the documents inside. But James Fisher was dead. Had been dead for hours before our conversation. Elena grabbed my arm. "Sophia, we need to leave now." Because standing in the library entrance were 3 men I recognized from the syndicate files. Enforcers who hadn't been arrested, who were now walking toward us with purpose. We didn't run. We couldn't. Not with dozens of witnesses around. Instead, I walked straight toward the men, my phone already recording. "Mrs. Whitmore," the lead man said smoothly. He was younger than the others, handsome in a corporate way. "I'm Daniel Morrison. I represent certain interests that would like to make you an offer." Morrison. As in Detective Morrison, who played poker with Richard. "My father's in federal custody, actually," he said. His smile didn't waver. Turns out he kept meticulous records of every bribe he took. Very embarrassing for the family. He gestured toward the library's conference room. "Shall we talk privately?" "Anything you have to say can be said right here," I replied, aware that Jenny was now recording too, that other library patrons had their phones out. "Very well." Daniel pulled out a tablet, showing a complex legal document. "We're prepared to acknowledge your inheritance claim to the Fisher properties. Full market value, approximately $2.8 billion. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement about past irregularities." "Irregularities? You mean murders?" "I mean, business practices that, while perhaps aggressive, were standard for the time." His tone remained pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "Take the deal, Mrs. Whitmore. You'll be wealthy beyond imagination." "I already am," I said, holding up the original deeds. "These predate your fraudulent contracts. I don't need your acknowledgement. I own those properties outright." For the first time, Daniel's composure cracked. "Those documents won't hold up in court. Too many questions about their authenticity, their chain of custody. Then I guess we'll let a judge decide." I turned to walk away, but his next words stopped me cold. "Melissa Crawford would like to speak with you. About Marcus. About what really happened that night." Melissa. The mistress who'd inherited everything. I'd been so focused on Richard that I'd almost forgotten about her. "She's waiting in the conference room," Daniel continued. "She has information you need to hear." Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, but the mention of Marcus made the decision for me. Elena and Jenny followed as I walked into the conference room, where Melissa sat at the polished table, looking nothing like the confident woman from the will reading. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her makeup smeared, her hands shaking as she lifted a coffee cup. "He wasn't supposed to die," she said without preamble, her voice hoarse. "Richard promised me no one would get hurt." I sat down across from her, my rage warring with a desperate need for answers. "Start from the beginning." Melissa laughed bitterly. "The beginning? I was hired 5 years ago. My job was to seduce Marcus, make him fall in love with me, give Richard leverage over his son. It was just another assignment. I'd done it before, with other targets." "You're a professional honeypot?" Jenny asked, her recorder openly visible on the table. "Was," Melissa corrected. She met my eyes, and I saw something unexpected there. Guilt. Marcus never fell for it. He knew what I was from day one. He played along to keep his father happy, but he never touched me. Never even kissed me. Everything Richard thought was happening between us was fake. The room spun. But the will, the inheritance, window dressing. Marcus changed his will to make it look like our affair was real. To keep Richard from getting suspicious while he gathered evidence. He was supposed to change it back before she trailed off, fresh tears cutting through her makeup. Before what? Before we ran. All three of us. You, me, and Marcus. He'd arranged new identities. Had money hidden offshore. We were going to disappear. Let the FBI handle Richard while we started over somewhere safe. Melissa pulled out her phone, scrolling to a message thread. Look, these are our real conversations. I read Marcus's messages, my heart breaking with each word. Just a few more days, Mel. Get Sophia somewhere safe on the 15th. I'll handle my father. Then we all disappear. Thank you for protecting her. I know this hasn't been easy for you. Protecting me? I looked up at Melissa. Who do you think kept the other enforcers away from you? Who made sure your food wasn't poisoned? Your car wasn't tampered with? Melissa's voice was fierce now. I've been your bodyguard for 2 years, Sophia. Marcus hired me to infiltrate his father's organization and protect you from the inside. Elena leaned forward. So, you're saying you're actually, what? An undercover agent. Former FBI, actually. I left the bureau after my partner was killed by someone on Richard's payroll. I've been working independently ever since, taking down corrupt organizations from within. She looked at me again. Marcus found me through James Fisher. They offered me a chance at revenge against Richard, and I took it. But if you were protecting us, why didn't you stop them from killing Marcus? Melissa's composure finally shattered completely. Because I didn't. No, Richard kept me out of the loop that night. Sent me to Aspen on a fake errand. By the time I realized what was happening, Marcus was already. She choked on a sob. I failed. I failed him, and I failed you. Daniel Morrison had been standing by the door, and now he stepped forward. Touching story. Completely unprovable, of course. And it doesn't change the fundamental situation. The syndicate is bigger than Richard Whitmore. Cut off the head, and it grows back. Is that a threat? Jenny asked, her camera turning toward him. It's a reality. Do you think a few arrests will stop this? We have resources you can't imagine. Connections at every level. Take the money, sign the NDA, and live your life. Or keep fighting and end up like Marcus. The room went cold at his words. But before I could respond, the door burst open. Federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting for everyone to get down. Daniel reached for something in his jacket and was immediately tackled. Agent Sarah Coleman, the one Marcus had told me to trust, helped me to my feet. Are you hurt? No, how did you, your guardian angel, she said with a slight smile. Mr. Fisher's son has been quite helpful. But James Fisher is dead. The news said James Fisher is in protective custody. The body this morning was a syndicate plant trying to flush him out. She turned to Melissa. Miss Crawford, we'll need your full cooperation. Melissa nodded, looking relieved. You'll have it. Everything. 20 years of operations, names, dates, methods. I want them all to burn. As the agents led Daniel and his men away, I found myself standing with Elena, Jenny, and Melissa. An unlikely alliance brought together by Marcus's death. What now? Elena asked. I looked at the documents spread on the table. Deeds, evidence, 40 years of secrets. Then I thought about Marcus's note, about the shack being a weapon, not a prison. Now we tear it all down, I said. Every corrupt official, every dirty deal, every crime they thought they'd buried. We use the properties to fund the investigation, turn their own resources against them. Jenny was already typing on her phone. I'll need exclusive access to everything. This story will take years to tell properly. You'll have it. I turned to Melissa. What will you do? She wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders. What I do best? Hunt down the ones who got away. The syndicate has tentacles everywhere. Someone needs to cut them off. Agent Coleman handed me a card. We'll need you in protective custody until this is over. No, I said firmly. I'm going back to the shack. Everyone stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Sophia, that's insane. Elena protested. They know you're there. They could come for me anywhere. But the shack is mine now. Really mine. And I'm done running from shadows. That night, I stood in front of the Fisher shack. My shack. With a different perspective. It wasn't a rotting monument to my humiliation anymore. It was ground zero of an empire built on blood. And it would be ground zero for its destruction. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. But this time it wasn't signed JF. It was signed MW. Proud of you, sophomore, finish what I started. Look under the floorboard beneath the window where you saw the shadow. One more surprise. M. My hand shook. It couldn't be, could it? I ran into the shack, not caring about the darkness or the creaking floors. I found the spot, pried up the floorboard with my bare hands. Underneath was a metal box and inside, a phone. It turned on immediately, showing a single video file. Marcus's face filled the screen, dated the day he died. Sophia, if you're watching this, then my plan worked even if I didn't survive it. The man who gave you this phone, he looks like me, doesn't he? Close enough to fool anyone who isn't looking too carefully. Close enough to die in my place while I disappear. My legs gave out. I sat on the floor, staring at the impossible. I'm sorry for the deception, but it was the only way. Richard would never stop hunting us unless he believed I was dead. The man who died, a terminal patient who volunteered, who wanted his family provided for. They have been generously. Tears streamed down my face as Marcus continued. I can't come back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm alive, and I'm watching, and I'm helping where I can. James Fisher is my contact. When you're ready, he'll know how to find me. Until then, trust Melissa, trust Coleman, and trust yourself. You're the strongest person I know, and you're about to prove it to the world. The video ended with Marcus saying the words I needed to hear. I love you, Sophia. This isn't goodbye. It's just see you later. The phone went dead in my hands, its message delivered. Outside, I heard car engines approaching. Not the threatening rumble of SUVs, but the steady sound of federal vehicles, bringing more agents to protect the shack and continue the investigation. I stood up, slipping the phone into my pocket. Marcus was alive somewhere, watching and waiting. The syndicate was crumbling. Its 40-year reign of terror ending. And I was standing in the center of it all. No longer the naive girl in those surveillance photos, but a woman who'd found her power in the most unlikely place. The shack had been meant to break me. Instead, it had revealed who I really was. Not just Sophia Whitmore, the deceived widow, but Sophia Fisher Whitmore, heir to an empire and architect of its redemption. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Legal battles, testimonies, rebuilding what had been corrupted. But tonight, I stood in my shack, my inheritance, my weapon, my strength. And for the first time since this all began, I smiled. They'd given me a shack. I was going to give them justice. The first attempt on my life came 3 weeks after the arrests. I was in the courthouse filing the paperwork to reclaim the Fisher properties when the clerk's eyes went wide, looking at something behind me. I turned just as a man in a maintenance uniform pulled a knife, lunging forward with practiced precision. Melissa appeared from nowhere, her body slamming into his before he reached me. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the knife skittering across the marble floor. Security swarmed them, but Melissa had already subdued him, his arm bent at an angle that made me wince. Third one this week, she said calmly, brushing off her jacket as the guards hauled him away. They're getting desperate. She was right. With Richard and Patricia in federal custody, the syndicate's leadership had fractured. Some were trying to flee the country. Others were turning state's evidence. But a hardcore faction had decided that killing me would somehow solve their problems. As if my death would make the FBI forget about the evidence. Make the frozen accounts unfreeze. Make 40 years of crimes disappear. Agent Coleman had assigned me a full protection detail, but I'd insisted on continuing the work. Every day I sat in that courthouse, in lawyers' offices, in federal buildings, systematically dismantling the empire built on my great-uncle's bones. And every day the threats escalated. You should reconsider the safe house, Coleman said that evening, reviewing the security footage of the attack. We can handle the legal proceedings without you physically present. No, I said, for what felt like the 100th time. They want me to hide, to be afraid. I won't give them that satisfaction. But bravado was easier in daylight. That night, alone in the shack, despite the agents stationed outside, I found myself jumping at every creak, every shadow. The phone Marcus had left, the one with his video, sat on the table like a lifeline to a ghost. I'd watched his message so many times I could recite it, but it didn't make his absence easier. A knock at the door made my heart race. Mrs. Whitmore, it's Tom. Elena sent me to check on you. I recognized Tom's voice and opened the door. But the man standing there wasn't Elena's boyfriend. It was someone wearing Tom's face, literally wearing it, like a sophisticated mask that moved with uncanny realism. Before I could scream, a hand covered my mouth and everything went black. I woke in a concrete